Hello, everyone. Today's story takes us to the vibrant state of California, USA. Known for its thriving economy and cultural diversity, California is a hub of technology, entertainment, and innovation. It is home to iconic cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, global symbols of urban life and opportunity. But behind this picturesque backdrop lies a dark tale centered on a young girl named Jaycee Dugard. Born on May 3, 1980, Jaycee was a bright, beautiful child. She lived a peaceful life with her mother and stepfather, surrounded by love and care. Her family initially resided in Arcadia, a city in Los Angeles County, but seeking a safer and quieter environment, they moved to the small town of Mayors, nestled about 700 kilometers away. For Jaycee's parents, this decision symbolized a fresh start, a chance to provide their daughter with the ideal setting to grow up. Little did they know, tragedy was just around the corner. On the morning of June 10, 1991, it was a Monday, and Jaycee's mother, Terry Probin, who worked as a layout artist at a printing company, had left for work early. Jaycee, only 11 years old at the time, wore her favorite pink outfit and walked alone from her house to the school bus stop. Halfway there, a gray car approached and stopped in front of her. Thinking the man in the car was simply asking for directions, she innocently walked closer. To her shock, the man inside used a stun gun on her, causing her to collapse. A woman who was also in the car quickly got out, dragged Jaycee inside, and the car sped away. The area was not far from Jaycee's home, and by sheer chance, her stepfather, Carl Probin, witnessed the horrifying scene of his stepdaughter being forced into the car from their house. Carl immediately chased after the car, but it was too late. Not only did he fail to catch up, but he also couldn't clearly see the license plate. All he could recall was that there were two people in the car, one of whom was a woman. He quickly called the police. American law enforcement responded rapidly. Within hours, local media began broadcasting news of the incident, urging the public to stay alert and cooperate to rescue Jaycee as soon as possible. A large police force was deployed, including helicopters and search dogs, to scour the area. Despite extensive efforts, there were no clues. Many volunteers joined the search teams, but sadly, no significant leads were found. The police created sketches of the suspects based on descriptions from Jaycee's stepfather and classmates. However, the distance from which they had seen the suspects made the sketches unreliable. A few days later, tens of thousands of flyers and posters were distributed to businesses across the United States. Because Jaycee's favorite color was pink, the town was adorned with pink ribbons as a symbol of hope and support for her family. To expand awareness further, her mother founded an organization named Jaycee's Hope to express gratitude to volunteers, provide counseling, and fundraise for the search efforts. Soon, t-shirts, jackets, and missing person posters featuring Jaycee's face were widely distributed. The case quickly gained national attention and was featured on the popular American television show America's Most Wanted. Tragically, despite everyone's best efforts, Jaycee was nowhere to be found. In desperation, the police began questioning whether the perpetrator might be someone Jaycee knew. Their first suspect was her stepfather, as he was the only direct witness. If he had been involved, it might explain why the police were unable to find her. Investigators brought Carl Probin in for questioning and administered a polygraph test. However, nothing suspicious was found. Carl was no longer a suspect. The police, desperate for leads, turned their attention to Jaycee's biological father, Ken Layton. Perhaps they thought he had taken extreme measures to bring his daughter into his life. However, what they uncovered was far from their suspicions. Ken didn't even know Jaycee existed. Years earlier, Ken had been in a brief relationship with Jaycee's mother, but they parted ways before Jaycee was born. Her mother never told him she was pregnant. This revelation struck investigators like a dead end. Ken had no motive, no connection to Jaycee, and no knowledge of her disappearance. He too was crossed off the list of suspects. The investigation hit a wall. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Leads dried up, witnesses disappeared, and the public's attention moved on. The case, once a top priority, began to collect dust. People whispered dark theories. Maybe Jaycee had been abandoned in some desolate place, or worse, that she was no longer alive. But one person refused to believe that. Her mother, Terry Probine, clung to hope with unyielding determination. For her, the absence of proof was proof of life. She poured her energy into keeping Jaycee's name alive in the public consciousness. Over 1 million flyers were distributed, bearing her daughter's face and the haunting question, "Have you seen me?" As technology advanced, experts generated age-progressed images, attempting to show what Jaycee might look like as the years passed. The effort was monumental, but it seemed like Jaycee had been swallowed by the earth itself. No clues, no evidence, no answers, just a chilling silence that left her family and the community in despair. So, where did she go? What horrors had she endured? To uncover the truth, we must go back to that fateful day, June 10, 1991. That day, after being dragged into the car, Jaycee vaguely heard a conversation between the man and woman who had taken her. When Jaycee fully regained consciousness, she found herself nearly 180 kilometers away from her home. The world around her had completely changed. Jaycee was being held captive in a decrepit storage shed surrounded by makeshift tents covered with tattered tarps. Inside were piles of junk and rotting debris. The scene resembled an abandoned backyard, a place no one would pay attention to. Her captors were a deranged couple, Philip Garrido and his wife, Nancy Garrido. Philip Garrido had a dark and violent past. Born in California in 1951, Philip's life of crime began early. After finishing high school, he committed his first known assault at the age of 21, targeting a 14-year-old girl. Though arrested, Philip managed to evade justice when the victim's family, seeking to protect her reputation, refused to let her testify in court. This loophole allowed him to escape legal punishment. Philip later married, but his marriage was plagued by violence. He repeatedly assaulted his wife, who eventually sought legal protection and successfully divorced him. However, this did little to change Philip's behavior. By 1976, at the age of 25, he escalated his crimes. He kidnapped a 25-year-old woman named Catherine, holding her captive in a storage unit for 5 hours and subjecting her to horrific abuse. While patrolling one evening, a police officer noticed a car parked near the entrance of a warehouse. Something about it seemed suspicious, so he decided to investigate. That decision brought the truth to light. Confronted with Catherine's testimony in court, the man had no defense and was ultimately sentenced to 50 years in prison. Strangely, while he was serving his time, Nancy frequently visited her uncle in jail. Over time, she developed feelings for Philip, and their relationship grew. On October 5, 1981, something remarkable happened. They got married inside the prison. On August 26, 1988, after 11 years behind bars, Philip was released on parole for good behavior and fitted with an electronic ankle monitor. Local prosecutors conducted regular checks on his residence to ensure he didn't re-offend. But Philip showed no signs of remorse. In fact, he seemed eager to commit more crimes. Shockingly, his wife Nancy, instead of stopping him, agreed to help. The couple began driving aimlessly around town until they spotted 11-year-old Jaycee walking alone. Without hesitation, they kidnapped her and locked her in a soundproof shed in their backyard, a space Philip had converted into a recording studio. No one could hear her cries for help. Philip handcuffed her, forced her to strip, and warned her never to scream or leave. He claimed her parents didn't want her anymore, that she was nothing but a homeless girl. To add to her fear, he mentioned the pack of large guard dogs outside. If she tried to escape, he told her, the dogs would tear her apart. In her first week of captivity, Jaycee remained handcuffed and had no one to talk to but Philip. He brought her fast food occasionally, gave her a bucket for the bathroom, and began sexually assaulting her, a routine he continued at least once a week for the next 3 years. He didn't allow her to write, read, or even speak her own name. Instead, he gave her a fake identity, Elisa. Over time, he brought her a small television, but only allowed her to watch shopping channels. Jaycee had no idea that her family and community were still desperately searching for her. On April 3, 1994, something unexpected happened. Philip brought her a cooked meal, an actual meal, not the cheap fast food she had been eating since her abduction. This was the first time in years she tasted something more substantial. His shift in behavior coincided with a major change. By this time, Jaycee, at only 13 years old, had become pregnant with his child. Rather than taking her to a hospital, Philip refused all medical help. Instead, he found information on childbirth and took it upon himself to teach her what she would need to know. On August 18, 1994, Jaycee gave birth to her first daughter. For the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled a smile that had been lost, buried beneath years of pain, fear, and isolation. It was the first sign of hope she had felt in so long. She poured all her love and care into her baby, determined to give her the care she had been denied. By 1997, Jaycee had learned enough from the television programs she was allowed to watch to give birth to her second daughter. The years of captivity had taught her resourcefulness, but the price she paid for this knowledge was immeasurable. As the children grew, Philip, seeking to accommodate their increasing needs, set up a large tent in the backyard. This temporary structure became a semblance of freedom for Jaycee, a space where she was allowed to leave the confined room she had been trapped in for so long. It was here, in this tent, that she was able to care for her two daughters, watching them grow, even as she was forced to suppress her own identity. Although both children were her flesh and blood, Philip's control over the family dynamic remained rigid. To satisfy his wife, he made the children call their nanny mom, while Jaycee, their biological mother, was relegated to the role of big sister. She, the one who had endured years of suffering to bring these children into the world, was forced to watch as they called another woman mother. It was a constant reminder of her powerlessness, a mother stripped of her right to love and nurture her own children the way she had always dreamed. The tent may have provided some physical space, but the emotional confinement was unyielding, and Jaycee was left to bear the weight of a role she was never meant to play. Philip felt that the only way for the children to grow up was to deceive the investigation of the light, and the fact that outsiders believed the two children were nannies and never suspected anything. By 2009, 18 years had passed since Jaycee was abducted, and her mother had never given up hope. Finally, a turning point arrived. On August 24, 2009, a man Philip arrived at the FBI office in San Francisco, leaving behind a note outlining his views on religion and gender, primarily to describe that he had recognized his past mistakes and no longer committed crimes. Furthermore, he brought his two daughters to the University of California campus to request permission to teach about religion. During this process, the school's police department happened to get involved, and he met with the department head, Lisa Campbell. In her meeting with Philip, she considered him an eccentric individual. At the same time, she noticed that the two girls Philip brought were behaving strangely. Both seemed to be terrified of Philip and constantly gloomy. They were extremely reserved and showed an overwhelming obedience to him. At that moment, Lisa sensed something was wrong. Being cautious, she requested Philip to sign a document and arranged for him to return the following day. The next day, Lisa secretly asked a police officer to investigate Philip further. After conducting the investigation, the officer discovered that Philip had a lengthy criminal record. By the afternoon, Philip returned for his 2 p.m. appointment with the two girls, and they appeared extremely pale, as if they had not been exposed to sunlight for a long time. Lisa then contacted Philip's parole officer to gather more information. Upon hearing that Philip had brought the two children with him, the parole officer broke into a cold sweat because, due to his criminal history, he was prohibited from living with minors. As a result, investigators visited Philip's home to look into his relationship with the two girls. However, they found only his wife, Nancy, and his elderly mother at the house. The two girls were nowhere to be found. Philip later explained that the girls were his wards and that their parents had agreed to let him take them to the university. The investigators then requested that he bring the children and their parents to the parole office for clarification. The next day, August 26, 2009, Philip, Nancy, Jaycee, and the two girls arrived at the parole office. At this point, Philip pointed to Jaycee and said, "This is Alyssa, my relative, and the two girls are her children." Jaycee also confirmed that she was Alyssa and that the two girls were her daughters. She further stated that Philip was a good man and treated her and the children very well. However, this was due to the fact that Philip had carefully prepared for these situations in advance. When investigators attempted to verify Jaycee's identity, they separated the three of them to gather information. When pressed to provide details that could confirm her identity, Jaycee became extremely defensive and agitated. The investigators then called in additional officers to explain the situation, and finally, in front of the police, Jaycee gathered the courage to reveal her real name. She admitted that her name was Jaycee and that 18 years earlier, she had been abducted by Philip and his wife and held captive in the backyard of their home, unable to escape. The police were shocked to hear her story and immediately arrested Philip and his wife. When Jaycee's mother received the call from the police, her emotions overwhelmed her. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. After 18 long years of searching, she was finally going to be reunited with her daughter. The two embraced, and Jaycee clung to her mother, crying uncontrollably. Her stepfather was also overjoyed to see her, though the police had already cleared him of suspicion. The police then went to the location where Jaycee had been held captive. The sight they encountered was nothing short of astonishing. The conditions were appalling. The backyard contained 2 makeshift sheds, surrounded by piles of garbage and discarded items. Nearby, there was a grey car, the very vehicle Philip had used to transport Jaycee. The room where Jaycee had lived was in a state of utter disrepair, and it was almost unbelievable that she had spent 18 years in such a miserable environment, all while raising 2 young daughters. Shortly after, Philip and Nancy were charged with 29 offenses. Philip initially denied the charges, but when confronted with the overwhelming evidence, he admitted to his crimes. On June 2, 2011, under state law, Philip was sentenced to 431 years in prison without the possibility of parole, while Nancy received a 36-year sentence, also without the possibility of parole. However, the case was far from resolved, as many individuals had indirectly contributed to this tragedy. Philip had a criminal history, and after his release on parole, he was supposed to be under government supervision. According to official records, the parole department was supposed to send officers to inspect Philip's home periodically. Additionally, in 1976, Philip had committed a crime involving a girl near South Lake, not far from where Jaycee lived. The police had overlooked far too many clues. In 2002, the fire department received a call reporting that a child in Philip's family had been injured while swimming, but Philip had no children. The fire department did not notify the parole department, and no one took the initiative to investigate who the child was. In 2006, Philip's neighbors also called the police, reporting that they had seen children living in his backyard. An officer visited Philip, speaking with him for about 30 minutes, but the backyard was never searched. Jaycee had endured a living hell for 18 years because of these failures. As a result, in July 2010, the state of California decided to compensate Jaycee with $20 million for their significant mistakes. The local police chief issued a public statement offering an apology to Jaycee and her family. Subsequently, Jaycee's family filed a lawsuit against the U.S. government, arguing that Philip had violated his parole conditions by consuming alcohol and using contraband while on parole. If the authorities had enforced the rules strictly, Jaycee would not have been abducted. However, the lawsuit was dismissed by the U.S. courts. In 2010, Jaycee established the Jaycee Foundation, dedicated to supporting families like hers, those who have endured severe psychological trauma. In July 2011, Jaycee published a memoir based on her own experiences. It is both heartbreaking and moving, as it recounts what 18 long years of captivity meant for an 11-year-old girl. The prolonged control and brainwashing had left Jaycee unable to trust others or easily reveal her true identity. After reuniting with her family, Jaycee went through a challenging period, but with their care and support, she was able to emerge from the darkness and rebuild her life. Today, she lives happily alongside her family. In July 2016, Jaycee published her second book, Freedom, My Book of Firsts. In this follow-up, she primarily shares insights about her life after being rescued, the process of healing, and how she reintegrated into society. Through this book, she hopes to inspire and support other survivors who've endured similar experiences. Even now, she firmly believes that each of us holds the key to our own happiness. She encourages everyone to hold on to that key as tightly as possible and cherish it. We would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this intriguing story. Feel free to share your perspective in the comments below. Thank you for following, and we'll see you in the next video with even more gripping stories.